Rebecca Martinez had dreamed of flying since she was 8 years old, watching fighter jets streak across the desert sky near her home in Nevada. Her father, a retired Air Force mechanic, had filled her childhood with stories of aerial combat and the brotherhood of pilots. Now, at 23, she stood in the sterile hallway of Randolph Air Force Base, holding a rejection letter that felt like a death sentence to her dreams. Colonel James Whitmore, the flight school commander, hadn't even looked up from his desk when he delivered the news. His voice carried the cold efficiency of a man who had crushed countless dreams before hers. Martinez, your test scores are adequate, but your psychological evaluation raises concerns about your ability to handle pressure. We need pilots who can maintain composure under extreme stress, not candidates who might crack during combat situations. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read the evaluation. The psychologist had noted her excessive emotional responses during the interview, particularly when discussing her father's stories of losing squadron mates in combat. They interpreted her tears as weakness, her passion as instability. She wanted to argue, to explain that her emotions came from understanding the gravity of the responsibility, not from fear. But Colonel Whitmore had already dismissed her, turning his attention to the next file on his desk. Walking across the base that afternoon, Rebecca felt the weight of failure settling on her shoulders. She had given up a scholarship to engineering school for this opportunity. Her father had mortgaged their family home to pay for her flight training prerequisites. The rejection wasn't just personal. It was financial devastation for her entire family. Other cadets avoided eye contact as she passed, their silence confirming what she already knew. News of her rejection had spread quickly through the tight-knit community. That evening she called her father from her barracks room. Miguel Martinez listened without interruption as she read the rejection letter aloud, her voice breaking on the phrases that had sealed her fate. "Mija," he said finally, his voice carrying decades of military wisdom, "sometimes the system gets it wrong, but that doesn't mean your dream has to die. There are other paths to the sky." Rebecca didn't understand what he meant then. She spent the next 3 days in her room, ignoring the concerned knocks of her roommate, Elena Rodriguez, who was still in the program. Elena had tried to offer comfort, but Rebecca couldn't bear to see the pity in her friend's eyes. The rejection felt like a public verdict on her inadequacy, a judgment that she wasn't strong enough, brave enough, or stable enough to serve her country in the way she had always envisioned. On the fourth day, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't leave quietly. She wouldn't slink home in defeat. Instead, she would find another way to prove that Colonel Whitmore and his evaluation team had made a terrible mistake. She just didn't know yet how dramatically that proof would eventually unfold. The civilian flight training program at Mesa Flight Academy was a far cry from the prestigious military facilities she had hoped to attend. The buildings were older, the equipment less advanced, and the instructors were a mix of retired military pilots and career civilian aviators. But Rebecca threw herself into the program with fierce determination, driven by a need to prove her worth that burned stronger than her original dream of military service. Her instructor, Captain Jack Harrison, was a gruff former Navy pilot who had lost his left arm in a training accident years earlier. He recognized the fire in Rebecca's eyes during their first meeting, the same intensity he had seen in himself before his career-ending injury. Unlike the military evaluators, Harrison saw her emotional investment in flying as an asset rather than a liability. The best pilots I ever flew with cared deeply about what they were doing, Harrison told her during their third lesson, as they practiced emergency procedures in a beat-up Cessna 172. The ones who treated it like just another job were the ones who made fatal mistakes when things went wrong. Passion keeps you sharp, Martinez. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Rebecca's progress was exceptional. She soloed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and earned her private pilot's license with perfect scores on both the written and practical exams. But civilian flying felt hollow compared to her military aspirations. She was learning to navigate clouds and land on peaceful runways, while her former classmates were preparing for combat missions and defending their country. The turning point came during her commercial pilot training 6 months later. Rebecca was practicing night navigation when she heard a distress call over the radio. A small aircraft had gone down in the mountains east of Phoenix, and search and rescue operations were being hampered by severe weather conditions. The pilot was trapped, injured, and time was running out. Rebecca listened as military and civilian rescue teams struggled to locate the crash site. The terrain was treacherous, with narrow canyons and unpredictable wind patterns that made helicopter rescue extremely dangerous. She knew those mountains intimately from her childhood hiking trips with her father. More importantly, she knew she had the skills to help. Without hesitation, Rebecca contacted the Rescue Coordination Center and volunteered her services. The controller was skeptical. She was just a civilian pilot with a small aircraft, but desperation overrode protocol. They gave her the last known coordinates and cleared her to join the search effort. Flying through the storm that night, Rebecca drew on every lesson her father had taught her about reading desert weather patterns and every skill Captain Harrison had drilled into her about precision flying. She found the crash site where military helicopters had failed, guided by intuition and an intimate knowledge of the landscape that no amount of training could replicate. Her radio call that night would become legendary among Arizona's aviation community. Rescue Control, this is Cessna 478 Alpha. I have visual on the crash site and the pilot is alive. Coordinates follow. Her voice was steady, professional, and completely composed despite the life-or-death situation unfolding around her. The rescue that followed made national news. Rebecca's precise navigation and steady nerves under pressure had saved a pilot's life when military resources had failed. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same emotional investment that had disqualified her from military service had given her the courage and determination to succeed where others had failed. Colonel Whitmore saw the news coverage 3 days later. The reporter had interviewed Rebecca about her background, mentioning her recent rejection from Air Force flight school. The colonel's face darkened as he realized the implications. The civilian pilot who had shown such exceptional skill and composure under pressure was the same candidate his evaluation team had deemed psychologically unfit for military service. But Rebecca's story was far from over. The rescue had caught the attention of people far more important than a single Air Force colonel. Within a week, she received a phone call that would change her life forever. "Ms. Martinez, this is General Patricia Sullivan from Air Force Special Operations Command. I think we need to talk." The meeting took place in a nondescript office building in downtown Phoenix, far from the military bases where Rebecca had faced her earlier rejection. General Sullivan was a small woman with silver hair and steel blue eyes that had seen combat in 3 different theaters of war. She got straight to the point. "I've reviewed your file and the circumstances of your rejection from flight school," the general began, her voice carrying an authority that made Colonel Whitmore seem like a junior officer. "I've also reviewed the recording of your rescue coordination from last week. There's a significant discrepancy between the psychological evaluation that ended your military career and the performance you demonstrated under actual life-or-death pressure." Rebecca sat quietly, unsure whether this was another opportunity or simply a debriefing about her civilian rescue work. General Sullivan continued, "We have a program that operates outside the traditional military structure. It's classified, selective, and demanding. The pilots we recruit don't go through standard flight school because they're not standard pilots. They're specialists who handle situations that require unconventional thinking and exceptional performance under extreme pressure." The general slid a folder across the table. "I can't tell you much about the program without a security clearance, but I can tell you that your psychological profile, the one that got you rejected from conventional flight training, is exactly what we're looking for. Your emotional investment in flying, your ability to think creatively under pressure, and your willingness to take calculated risks are assets, not liabilities." Rebecca opened the folder to find psychological evaluations, flight performance records, and character references from people she had never met. Someone had been watching her progress closely, documenting her civilian flight training, and analyzing her performance during the mountain rescue. The thoroughness of the investigation was both impressive and slightly unsettling. "If you're interested," General Sullivan said, "you'll need to undergo a different kind of evaluation process. It's more intensive than standard military psychological screening, but it's designed to identify unconventional capabilities rather than screen them out. The commitment is significant. If you're selected, you'll be unavailable for civilian life for at least 4 years, and you'll never be able to discuss the details of your work with anyone outside the program." Rebecca thought about her father's words about finding other paths to the sky. This wasn't the military career she had originally envisioned, but it was an opportunity to serve her country in a way that valued her unique strengths rather than penalizing them. "What kind of flying would I be doing?" The general smiled for the first time during their meeting. "The kind that matters most when everything else has failed. The kind that requires pilots who care deeply about the mission and have the skills to make impossible things possible. Sound interesting?" 3 weeks later, Rebecca found herself at a facility that didn't officially exist, beginning a training program that would push her capabilities far beyond anything she had imagined during her childhood dreams of military service. The training facility was located in a remote area of Nevada, disguised as a private aerospace testing company. The other candidates came from diverse backgrounds. Some were former military pilots who had been recruited for special operations. Others were civilian aviators with exceptional skills, and a few were engineers and technicians who brought unique technical expertise to the program. Rebecca's class consisted of 12 candidates, and their training began with 2 weeks of intensive psychological evaluation. Unlike her previous military screening, these evaluations were designed to understand rather than eliminate unconventional thinking patterns. The psychologists were interested in how she processed stress, made decisions under pressure, and maintained focus during extended periods of high-stakes flying. The flying component of the training was unlike anything Rebecca had experienced. Instead of standard military aircraft, they trained on modified civilian planes equipped with advanced avionics and experimental flight systems. The missions were complex, requiring split-second decision-making and the ability to operate in environments where traditional rules of aviation didn't apply. Her instructor for the advanced portion of the program was Major Rachel Chen, a former Air Force test pilot who had been recruited into the program 5 years earlier. Major Chen had a reputation for pushing candidates to their absolute limits, and she seemed particularly interested in testing Rebecca's ability to handle criticism and setbacks. "Martinez," Major Chen said during their first one-on-one training session, "I've read your file. You were rejected from standard flight school because they thought you were too emotional. My job is to find out if that emotional investment makes you stronger or weaker when lives are on the line. We're about to find out. The training scenarios were designed to recreate the most challenging situations a pilot might face. Rebecca flew simulated rescue missions in hostile territory, navigated through electronic warfare environments, and learned to operate aircraft systems that pushed the boundaries of current technology. Each scenario built upon the previous one, increasing in complexity and stress level. What set Rebecca apart from her fellow candidates was her intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior under extreme conditions. While other pilots relied heavily on instruments and protocols, she seemed to sense when an aircraft was approaching its limits and could coax performance from machines that shouldn't technically be capable of what she was asking them to do. Major Chen noticed this ability during a particularly challenging night training exercise. Rebecca was flying a modified aircraft through a simulated thunderstorm when one of the engines failed. Instead of following standard emergency procedures, she improvised a solution that kept the aircraft stable and allowed her to complete the mission. Her actions violated several flight safety protocols, but they worked perfectly under the specific conditions she faced. That was either brilliant flying or dangerous recklessness, Major Chen said during the debriefing. Explain your decision-making process. Rebecca described how she had felt the aircraft's response to the engine failure and recognized that standard procedures would have resulted in a loss of control given the weather conditions. She had improvised based on her understanding of the aircraft's aerodynamics and her intuitive sense of what the machine could handle. The textbook would have gotten me killed, she concluded. I trusted my instincts and the aircraft's capabilities instead of following procedures that weren't designed for those specific conditions. Major Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in this program. The ability to go beyond standard training and find solutions when conventional approaches fail. By the end of the 8-week program, Rebecca had emerged as one of the top candidates. Her combination of technical skill, creative problem-solving, and emotional resilience had impressed even the most skeptical instructors. But her real test was yet to come. The final phase of Rebecca's training involved actual missions that couldn't be simulated. She learned that the program was responsible for operations that required absolute secrecy and exceptional pilot skill. Her first assignment would be a humanitarian mission that had been deemed too dangerous for conventional military or civilian resources. The briefing took place in a secure conference room where Rebecca met the other members of her operational team. There was Dr. Michael Torres, a former NASA engineer who specialized in aircraft modification and emergency repairs. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wilson was a former Navy helicopter pilot with extensive experience in medical evacuation procedures. Captain David Kim brought expertise in navigation and communication systems from his background in Air Force Special Operations. Their mission was to extract a team of medical researchers from a remote location in South America, where political instability had made conventional diplomatic or military intervention impossible. The researchers had been providing medical care to indigenous communities when violence erupted in the region, cutting off all normal evacuation routes. The terrain is mountainous, the weather is unpredictable, and we have no official support from either the U.S. or local governments, Major Chen explained during the briefing. This is exactly the kind of mission that requires unconventional thinking and exceptional flying skills. Martinez, you'll be the primary pilot. Your job is to get the team in and out safely, regardless of what obstacles we encounter. Rebecca felt a familiar mixture of excitement and responsibility as she studied the mission parameters. This was why she had wanted to become a pilot, not for the glory or recognition, but for the opportunity to use her skills to help people when no one else could. The rejection from standard flight school suddenly seemed like a blessing in disguise. The aircraft they would be using was a modified turboprop that had been extensively customized for covert operations. It could operate from extremely short runways, had advanced communication and navigation systems, and could carry enough fuel for extended missions without refueling. Most importantly, it was designed to be as quiet as possible, allowing them to operate without attracting unwanted attention. Rebecca spent 2 days studying the aircraft systems and practicing with the specific modifications that had been made for this mission. The plane responded differently than anything she had flown before, requiring her to adapt her flying techniques to match its unique characteristics. On the morning of the mission, she received a phone call that would add an unexpected element to an already complex operation. Martinez, this is Colonel Whitmore from Randolph Air Force Base. I understand you're involved in some kind of classified operation. I want you to know that I've reconsidered your application for flight school. If you're interested in returning to the standard program, we can discuss it when you complete your current assignment. Rebecca looked across the hangar at her team, making final preparations for a mission that would test every skill she had developed over the past months. The irony of the colonel's call wasn't lost on her. He was offering her the opportunity she had originally wanted, just as she was about to embark on the kind of mission that proved she belonged in a completely different category of military service. "Thank you for the call, Colonel," she replied, "but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." The flight to South America took 14 hours, with 2 refueling stops at locations that didn't appear on any official aviation charts. Rebecca's team maintained radio silence throughout the journey, communicating only through encrypted channels when necessary. The mission's success depended on their ability to remain invisible to both official and unofficial surveillance. As they approached the target area, Rebecca began to understand why conventional rescue operations had been deemed impossible. The terrain was a maze of narrow valleys surrounded by peaks that rose to over 15,000 feet. Weather patterns were unpredictable, with sudden storms that could appear without warning and wind conditions that changed dramatically within minutes. The researchers were located at a small medical clinic in a valley that was accessible only by foot or helicopter. Rebecca's aircraft couldn't land there, but she had identified a rough airstrip about 10 miles away where she could set down long enough for her team to reach the clinic and escort the researchers to safety. The landing was one of the most challenging of Rebecca's career. The airstrip was barely long enough for their aircraft, and crosswinds threatened to push them off the runway throughout the approach. She drew on every lesson she had learned during her training, using her intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior to compensate for conditions that would have made landing impossible by conventional standards. "Nice work, Martinez," Dr. Torres said as they touched down safely. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone land an aircraft in conditions like that." While her team members made their way to the clinic, Rebecca remained with the aircraft, monitoring weather conditions and maintaining communication with their base. The political situation in the region was deteriorating rapidly, with reports of armed groups moving through the area. Their window for extraction was closing quickly. 3 hours later, she received word that the team had reached the clinic and were beginning the evacuation process. The researchers were alive and mostly uninjured, but one of them required medical attention that couldn't be provided in the field. The evacuation would need to be expedited, regardless of the risks. Rebecca started the aircraft engines and began her pre-flight checks. The weather had worsened during the afternoon, with low clouds and gusty winds that would make takeoff extremely dangerous. But she had committed to getting her team out safely, and she wasn't going to let weather conditions prevent her from fulfilling that commitment. When her team arrived at the airstrip with the researchers, Rebecca could see the exhaustion and fear in their faces. These were people who had dedicated their lives to helping others, and they were now depending on her skills to get them home safely. "Everyone strap in," she announced over the intercom. "We're going to experience some turbulence on the way out, but I'll get us through it." The takeoff was even more challenging than the landing. The aircraft was heavier with additional passengers, and the deteriorating weather conditions made maintaining control extremely difficult. Rebecca had to use every technique she had learned during her training, pushing the aircraft to its limits while maintaining the safety margins necessary to protect her passengers. As they climbed away from the mountains, Rebecca felt the satisfaction that came from completing a mission that had seemed impossible. She had proven to herself and others that her unconventional approach to flying was exactly what some situations required. The rejection from standard flight school had led her to opportunities that were far more meaningful than anything she could have experienced in a traditional military career. But the mission wasn't over yet. They still had to navigate through hostile airspace and reach safety before the political situation in the region prevented their escape. The flight home was complicated by reports of increased military activity in the airspace they needed to traverse. Rebecca's aircraft wasn't equipped for combat, and their mission required them to avoid detection rather than engage with hostile forces. She had to find a route that would keep them safely away from potential threats while maintaining the speed necessary to reach their destination before fuel ran low. Her solution was to fly at extremely low altitude, using the terrain to mask their aircraft's radar signature. It was a technique that required constant attention and precise navigation, but it allowed them to avoid the air defense systems that were monitoring higher altitudes. Dr. Torres, who was monitoring their navigation systems, was impressed by Rebecca's ability to maintain course accuracy while flying only a few hundred feet above the ground. "Martinez, you're threading the needle between mountains and radar coverage with precision I've never seen before. Where did you learn to fly like this?" "From my father," Rebecca replied, maintaining her focus on the terrain ahead. "He taught me to read the landscape and understand how aircraft behave when you push them beyond their normal operating parameters. The rest came from training and experience." Lieutenant Commander Wilson, who had been monitoring radio communications, reported that their aircraft had been detected by local air defense systems, but had been dismissed as a civilian transport that posed no threat. Their low-altitude flight profile and modified transponder signals had successfully disguised their true nature and mission. As they crossed into international airspace, Rebecca felt the tension in the aircraft begin to ease. The researchers were safe, her team had performed flawlessly, and the mission was approaching successful completion. But she knew that their work was far from over. This was just the beginning of a career that would involve similar operations around the world. The landing at their base in Nevada was routine compared to the challenges they had faced during the mission. As Rebecca shut down the aircraft engines, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from rejection at Air Force Flight School to successful completion of a mission that conventional military resources couldn't have handled. Major Chen was waiting for them in the hangar, along with General Sullivan and other program officials. The debriefing would be extensive, but Rebecca could see from their expression that the mission had been considered a success by everyone involved. "Martinez," General Sullivan said as Rebecca climbed down from the aircraft, "outstanding work. You've proven that our unconventional approach to pilot selection and training produces results that can't be achieved through traditional methods. Colonel Whitmore called me yesterday to inquire about your status. I think he's beginning to understand that his evaluation process might need some adjustments. Rebecca smiled at the mention of Colonel Whitmore. The man who had rejected her application had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that led to her finding her true calling. She wondered if he would ever understand the irony of his decision. Over the following weeks, Rebecca's success on the South American mission led to additional assignments that tested her skills in new ways. She flew humanitarian missions in conflict zones, participated in disaster relief operations, and supported scientific research projects in remote locations around the world. Each mission reinforced her belief that her emotional investment in flying was a strength rather than a weakness. The same passion that had been criticized during her military evaluation drove her to find creative solutions to impossible problems and maintain performance under extreme stress. 6 months after the South American mission, Rebecca received an unexpected phone call that would bring her story full circle. Colonel Whitmore had been selected to visit her training facility as part of a Pentagon review of unconventional military programs. The visit was scheduled to include a demonstration of the program's capabilities, with Rebecca serving as the primary pilot for a simulated rescue operation. She would have the opportunity to show Colonel Whitmore exactly what kind of pilot he had rejected from his program. The demonstration flight was designed to showcase the unique capabilities that the program had developed. Rebecca would be flying a modified aircraft through a series of challenging scenarios that required the kind of unconventional thinking and exceptional skill that had made her successful in her new career. Colonel Whitmore arrived at the facility with a small group of Pentagon officials who were evaluating the program for potential expansion. Rebecca recognized him immediately, though he showed no signs of remembering her specifically. She was just another pilot among many he had rejected over the years. The briefing for the demonstration flight took place in the same conference room where Rebecca had received her first mission assignment. Major Chen provided an overview of the program's objectives and capabilities, while General Sullivan explained how the selection process identified candidates who might not succeed in traditional military roles, but excelled in unconventional operations. Today's demonstration will be conducted by one of our most successful pilots, General Sullivan announced. Captain Martinez has completed 12 missions over the past 8 months, including several operations that were deemed impossible by conventional military standards. Her background is particularly relevant to this review. Rebecca stepped forward to provide the technical briefing for the demonstration flight. She noticed Colonel Whitmore paying closer attention as she spoke, and she wondered if he was beginning to recognize her name from his previous evaluations. The demonstration scenario involved a simulated rescue operation in hostile territory, similar to the real missions Rebecca had flown during her deployment. She would need to navigate through simulated air defenses, land on a short runway in challenging terrain, and extract a team of personnel under time pressure. As Rebecca walked toward the aircraft, Colonel Whitmore approached her. "Captain Martinez, your name is familiar. Have we met before?" Rebecca turned to face the man who had ended her original military career with a single evaluation. "Yes, sir. You rejected my application for Air Force Flight School about 18 months ago. You said my psychological evaluation raised concerns about my ability to handle pressure." Colonel Whitmore's expression changed as he recognized her. "I remember now. You showed excessive emotional responses during your evaluation. We determined that you weren't suitable for military flying." "Yes, sir," Rebecca replied. "You were right about my emotional responses. I do care deeply about flying and about the missions I'm assigned. Today's demonstration should show you whether that emotional investment makes me stronger or weaker as a pilot." The demonstration flight exceeded everyone's expectations. Rebecca navigated through the simulated threats with precision and creativity, found solutions to problems that the scenario designers had expected would force her to abort the mission, and completed the extraction under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced military pilots. Her radio communications during the flight were calm, professional, and completely composed despite the high-stress situations she was navigating. The same emotional investment that had concerned Colonel Whitmore during her evaluation had been channeled into exceptional performance under pressure. After landing, Rebecca joined the Pentagon officials for the mission debriefing. Colonel Whitmore was notably quiet during the discussion, but she could see that he was processing the implications of what he had witnessed. "Captain Martinez," one of the Pentagon officials said, "your performance today was exceptional. Can you explain how your current training differs from standard military flight school?" Rebecca thought carefully about her response. "The main difference is that this program evaluates candidates based on their potential to succeed in unconventional situations, rather than their ability to conform to standard protocols. My emotional investment in flying, which was seen as a liability in traditional evaluation, is considered an asset here because it drives me to find creative solutions when conventional approaches fail." Colonel Whitmore finally spoke. "Captain, I owe you an apology. Our evaluation process is designed to identify candidates who fit our standard training model, but it's clearly inadequate for identifying exceptional capabilities that don't fit traditional patterns. Your performance today demonstrates skills that would be valuable in any military flying assignment. Rebecca appreciated the apology, but she also understood that Colonel Whitmore's evaluation process served an important purpose. Most military pilots needed to follow standard procedures and work within established protocols. Her unconventional approach was valuable for specialized operations, but it might not be appropriate for all military flying assignments. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I think both types of programs are important. Standard Flight School prepares pilots for most military missions, while programs like this one identify candidates who can handle situations that require unconventional thinking. The key is matching pilots to the right type of mission." The Pentagon Review resulted in expansion of the unconventional pilot program, with Colonel Whitmore being selected to help develop new evaluation criteria that could identify candidates like Rebecca, without compromising the standards needed for conventional military flying. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had rejected her would now be helping to find others with similar capabilities. Rebecca's career in the program continued to flourish over the following years. She flew missions that saved lives, supported critical research, and handled situations that couldn't be resolved through conventional military or civilian resources. Her emotional investment in flying, once seen as a disqualifying weakness, had become her greatest professional strength. The story of her rejection and eventual success became legendary within military aviation circles. It served as a reminder that exceptional capabilities don't always fit traditional evaluation criteria, and that sometimes the candidates who don't meet standard requirements are exactly the ones needed for the most challenging missions. Years later, when Rebecca was promoted to major and given responsibility for training new pilots in the program, she would often share her story with candidates who had faced similar rejection from conventional military training. Her message was always the same. Sometimes the path to your true calling isn't the one you originally planned to take. The young pilots who trained under Rebecca's supervision learned that exceptional flying required more than technical skill and adherence to protocols. It required the kind of emotional investment and creative thinking that couldn't be taught in traditional classrooms, but could be developed through experience and mentorship. Rebecca's father, Miguel Martinez, lived to see his daughter achieve success that far exceeded her original military aspirations. He attended her promotion ceremony, wearing his old Air Force uniform and beaming with pride as she received recognition for her contributions to national security through unconventional military operations. "Mija," he said after the ceremony, "I always knew you would find your way to the sky. Sometimes the best paths are the ones that don't appear on any map." Rebecca's story continues to inspire military aviators who face rejection or setbacks in their careers. Her example proves that exceptional capabilities can emerge from unconventional backgrounds, and that the qualities that make someone unsuitable for standard military service might be exactly what's needed for specialized operations. The program she helped establish has since trained hundreds of pilots who bring unique skills to military operations around the world. Each of them carries forward the lesson Rebecca learned during her own journey. That true strength comes from understanding and embracing your unique capabilities rather than trying to fit into someone else's definition of what a pilot should be. Colonel Whitmore, now retired, often speaks at military conferences about the importance of diverse evaluation criteria and the value of unconventional thinking in military operations. He credits Rebecca's example with helping him understand that effective military leadership requires recognizing and developing exceptional capabilities wherever they appear, even when they don't match traditional expectations. The legacy of Rebecca's rejection and eventual success extends beyond her individual career. It has influenced how the military evaluates and trains pilots, leading to programs that can identify and develop unconventional capabilities that might otherwise be overlooked. Her story proves that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those who don't fit the mold, and that the best leaders are those who can recognize exceptional potential, even when it appears in unexpected forms. Today, Rebecca continues to fly missions that require the unique combination of technical skill, creative thinking, and emotional resilience that made her successful in unconventional military operations. She has found her place in the sky, not through the traditional path she originally planned, but through a journey that revealed capabilities she never knew she possessed. Her name is now spoken with respect in military aviation circles, not as the candidate who was rejected from flight school, but as the pilot who proved that exceptional performance can emerge from unconventional backgrounds. The F-22 pilots who now know her story understand that true military excellence comes in many forms, and that sometimes the best pilots are those who bring something unique to the cockpit that can't be found in any training manual. The radio frequencies that once carried news of her rejection now carry reports of her successes, and the military community that once questioned her suitability for service now recognizes her as an example of what can be achieved when exceptional capabilities are properly identified and developed. Rebecca Martinez has become living proof that the sky belongs to those who have the courage to reach for it, regardless of the obstacles they encounter along the way.